So I want to tell you about a pattern that I see forming here at Shepherd of Life. It seems to me that every time Pastor John goes out of town, something out of the ordinary happens. And since I'm here to kind of pick up his duties while he's gone, these things usually fall to me. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, for instance, a month or so ago, I got to do my first wedding because John was out of town. I did my first funeral a year or so ago because he was gone. I've even gotten to know some folks in the congregation better because they happened to become ill while he was gone. They went in the hospital and I went and visited them. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But John was out of town all last week, and true to form, something unusual happened. So on Wednesday, I got a text from Andrea, who works in the office. And this is what the text said. I just got a call that I think needs to be addressed quickly. David Rhodes from Heritage something, Ministries maybe. He is working with someone who used to attend church here. And she gives his name. He's an attempted suicide and is requesting to see Pastor John. I was thinking possibly you could give David a call. Unusual to say the least. So I did give David a call. And he told me about this gentleman. I'll call him Frank. Well, Frank is in this local rehab facility recuperating from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And as David has been counseling him, it came up that he visited Shepherd of Life on a few occasions, and he remembered it fondly. He very specifically remembered John. So David thought, well, maybe I should call John and see if John would be willing to come over and talk to Frank, because Frank is in a lot of emotional distress. Well, since John is out of town, I offered to go see this gentleman, and we arranged that for Thursday morning, a week ago, Thursday morning. So as I'm driving over there to the rehab center, I said a little prayer, and I actually prayed that some words from our lesson today would hold true. And to show you what I mean, let me just briefly review what we just heard. Well, at the beginning of the lesson, there are some people who are admiring the huge and ornate temple there in Jerusalem. And at that time, that temple was the very center of the Jewish religion. God himself was said to reside there. And to give you some sense of scope, let's compare that temple to the temple to football just up the road here. That stadium holds roughly 100,000 people. Scholars believe that in the entire complex there in Jerusalem, that temple could hold 400,000 people. So it was a shocking statement when Jesus says everything is going to be torn down. And here are his exact words. The days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. And then Jesus goes on to give some ominous warnings about future events, but he ends on an upbeat note by saying, simply trust in God. In fact, he uses these words, I will give you words and wisdom. And he ends with these assuring words, not a hair on your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls. So as I headed over to see Frank, I simply prayed that God would give me the words and the wisdom that I needed, because I could very well be finding myself in a situation where I was in over my head, and I could use some guidance and strength. Well, as I walked into the front of the rehab center, David was actually right there to greet me, and we went back to his office, and he began to tell me about Frank. I found David to be really likable, really affable, and if I had to describe him, and maybe you'll get this reference or not, I would liken him to Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. Well, he told me all the conversations that he's had with Frank, gave me some details, and then he said again how Frank kind of lit up when he talked about coming to Shepherd of Life, even though that had been a number of years ago. So armed with that information, I headed down the long hallway to see Frank, last door on the left. As I walked into the room, I couldn't really see much because the curtain was drawn, but I could hear a man speaking and a woman as well. And I kind of came around the curtain, and there was Frank. He was sitting up in a big side chair, and then there was a woman sitting there. She quickly wrapped up what she was saying, grabbed her clipboard, and left. So Frank and I were left alone there. Now, if I had to describe Frank, I would say that without too much trouble, he could play Santa Claus. He had a full white beard, white hair. He actually told me later on that a year ago he weighed 305 pounds. He was down to 190 now, and he's 67 years old. Well, I introduced myself, and he greeted me warmly and thanked me for coming, and I kind of explained my position here at Shepherd of Life and told him about my relationship to John, and he immediately started reminiscing about when he had been here, and I could see it in his eyes. He put himself right back in this sanctuary. He started marveling at the stained glass window here. He talked about all of the wood, and then he talked about John, and he said, every time I came there and John preached, it seemed like he was talking directly to me. And he always spoke words of grace, which is what I needed to hear, not fire and brimstone. Well, David had warned me that I might find while I was talking to Frank that Frank might be slipping in and out of lucidity, clarity. And that was indeed the case. He'd be talking about something and he'd kind of drift away and then he'd come back to me. But in one of the clearer moments, he lamented the fact that he did not have his favorite Bible. He liked that Bible because it had notes and commentaries, and it really helped him understand what he was reading. And so I kind of took that little opening, and I just reminded him that no matter what he had done, that he was still a child of God. Always loved, never abandoned. And began to get emotional. And he described how he was just overwhelmed with guilt and remorse. He had pretty much ruined everything in his life, ruined his marriage, ruined his relationship with his children and his grandchildren. He could very well be facing jail time. And although he didn't get into any details about the specific events that kind of led him here, he said he had asked forgiveness from God over and over and over. But he was not sure that it was coming. And I don't know if my words and wisdom were of any value to him, but I simply said, well, I did believe that he was forgiven. And whether he could see or feel that right now or not. He began reminiscing about something else, and he kind of drifted away, and finally he fell asleep. So I said a quick prayer, and then I left. And so I've been thinking a lot about our lesson from Luke, about my conversation with Frank, and about us. So maybe here's the takeaway. Everything we have in this life, everything we know of in this world, is all temporary. The buildings that we erect will all fall one day, be they glorious temples to God that invaders destroy, or simple homes that wind and water can wash away. The objects that we have in our life, the things that we cherish, we value, we only have them from a short period of time. Even the relationships we have will all be severed at some point. The more self-destructive among us will do that with our own actions. But even those of us who nurture our relationships with care will see them end one day when death either takes them or us. It's inevitable. There's no escaping how fleeting and temporary our existence is. And what a sad, sad tale this would be if our God had not entered into our temporary world and conquered death and brought to us his permanent love. We believe in that love. We believe in that promise, and we give thanks and praise to God. We join the psalmist who talked about this permanent love when he said, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." This is a message we can never hear too often, It's a message that I felt like that maybe Frank needed to hear again, so I decided to go see him again. And I went to see him on Monday of this week. But as I was driving over there, I kept thinking about the fact that he was missing his Bible, so I decided to stop by a bookstore, and I got him a new Bible. A Bible with the Message translation, which is a little more easily understood. It's a modern translation. It also was a study Bible, so it had the notes and commentaries that he liked. So as I walked in his room early Monday afternoon, Frank was sitting up. He was eating lunch, and he greeted me warmly. He was lively and energetic, and we chatted a while. And then I showed him the Bible that I had, and I asked him if he would be interested in having it. And he said, absolutely, yes. So I quickly grabbed a pen and wrote a note in the front that said, I hope that the words contained in this book would always remind him just how much God loves him. And then I took the bookmark ribbon and I placed it on a certain page because there was a couple of passages in there that I hoped to share with him if the opportunity arose. And I gave him the book. Well, he began talking, regaling me with lots of different stories, but then finally he said this to me. I keep trying to figure out why God has kept me alive. So I asked him to explain that. And he told me some stories. He told me a story of when he was 12 years old, and he nearly drowned in Lake Michigan when he fell through the ice. And somehow his little buddy was able to pull him out of that frozen water. He told me how when he was an adult, on 3 separate occasions, he was in automobile accidents where he totaled his car. And on all 3 occasions, he walked away. And then there was this latest incident. So why was God keeping him around? What did God want from him? I told him that I did not have the answer to that question. And I simply suggested that maybe in due time God would reveal that to him. But he kept almost obsessing on this question. And it was because in his mind there was pretty much a miracle that happened with his suicide attempt. And then he opened up to me exactly what happened that night. He was in his house with his spouse in the living room. And one of those typical arguments broke out. And his wife started in on him, and she was going on and on and on, and he could feel something rising in himself. And as it went on and on, finally, he just reached a breaking point, and he got up, and he went into the bedroom, over to the closet, and he has his loaded gun up there. He pulls his gun out, and even though he knew it was loaded, he took the magazine out, and he put another one in, and he walked out to the living room, and she's going on and on still, and he screams, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. She's sitting in the center of the couch, and he takes the gun, and he shoots to the side of her and hits the couch. Then he shoots to the other side and hits the couch again. He vividly remembers the stuffing flying out. And he took the gun, pointed it at his chest, pulled the trigger. And the reason he feels there's some kind of a miracle going on is because that bullet went through and did not hit any of his major organs. Missed the heart, barely nicked the liver. But what it did do is it hit his spinal cord. And now he is paralyzed from the waist down. And these are the senseless, awful actions that he feels so guilty about and has so much remorse about. To use the words from our lesson, everything in his life has been thrown down because of his actions. Yet he wants to know what God has in store for him. Truly, only God knows that. Well, I ended up leaving a few minutes later, but as I was going, he said several times how he looks forward to the day when he can roll into this sanctuary and worship here again. And I look forward to that day as well. God's plan for salvation includes all of you and me and even people who have gotten things terribly, terribly wrong, like Frank. And the inescapable truth is that all the things that we have in this life will one day all be thrown down. But it's also true that God's love transcends the temporary things of this world, and he promises us a permanent peace. But perhaps there is no better way to say that than from the Bible itself. When I took that ribbon in Frank's Bible, I placed it in Romans 8. And let me share with you those last two verses again. And this is from the Message translation. I am absolutely convinced that nothing living or dead, angelic or demonic, today or tomorrow, high or low, thinkable or unthinkable, absolutely nothing can get between us and God's love. Perfect words for Frank. Perfect words for us. Amen.